I can just give you later on. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Very good afternoons to all. My name is Zaida, and of course, some of you here, I recognize and know you very well. So welcome to the Edutech bootcamps on theoretical and conceptual framework. Feel free to just uh, say something if you cannot hear me because lately I do not know why my internet line is not really good in this couple of days. I'm afraid that I might be going to talk alone. Okay, so let us discuss about this topic. This is actually a very important topic. And if I'm not mistaken, you can see my slide, isn't it? Okay, I think so. Let me look at the chat. If someone can say in chat that you can see my slide. Okay. Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, so let us go to this theoretical and conceptual framework. And we will discuss on four discussion topic. What is theoretical framework? What is conceptual framework? How to formulate it? And let experience it. We might going to have a couple of minutes so that you can experience it and asking question. Okay. In reality, actually, the problem that we would like to solve in our research, because regardless of you are doing master top course, master mixed mode, master for research or PhD, you have problem to solve, isn't it? Because doing research is actually we would like to solve a problem. That's why in chapter 1 we have background of problem, then we have problem statement. So in reality, the problem that we wish to investigate is actually has a root in a numbers of theory. In other words, is that the problem, for example, let's say we face problem on low motivation level among Form 2 student in learning science. So that is the problem. Okay. And of course, when you talk about low motivation level, there is a theory, which is actually motivation theory, that will tell us uh, the concept of motivation, how to increase motivation, and motivation involve what kinds of element. So this is where you can see that in reality, when we do research, we will actually solve a problem that the problem is actually has a root in a numbers of theory. And of course, in the context of us at the Faculty of Educational Sciences and Technology, of course, most of you enroll into postgraduate in education. So the theories related to education, teaching and learning theory. If you enroll into other faculty programs like engineering, management, they also have a theory, okay? Because theory will explain on the situation, okay? So where are the theories in your research? Remember, you know that based on UTM thesis format, you have to provide theoretical frameworks and conceptual framework in your chapter 1. And of course, in chapter 2, you will discuss detail on the theory that underpin your study. But actually, in reality, theory is actually everywhere in your research, and it must be coherent and aligned. What do I mean by that is that let's say we take back the problem about low motivation levels about Form 2 student in learning STEM. So the motivation theory is the theory that we use to underpin our research. So if we decide on certain motivation theory based on certain philosopher, like for example, let's say we take ARCS models as a motivation models that we use in our research by Keller. Then of course, Keller is not only mentioned in chapter 1 in theoretical and conceptual framework, but it also mentioned in chapter 2 that we discussed in detail. It also will affect our chapter 3, it also will affect our chapter 4, and it will also affect our chapter 5. So in chapter 3, we have our research philosophy, and in briefly, we will state it in our chapter 1. So in terms of research philosophy, theory is actually aligned with the philosophical approach that we will use. Okay? Theory also will actually explain and give solution. It will contextualize the problem and guide our objective in terms of problem solution. It's still in chapter 1. So theory also will influence the tools and methods for data collection in our instrument. Okay, and it also will define and explain the relationship between variables that will be what are the variables that we will focus on our research. If we conducting If you plan to conduct experimental-based research, of course, you have intervention or treatment. So theory also play a crucial role in designing, implementing, and evaluating your intervention. And last but not least, theory also will actually be there in your finding chapter, because theory help you interpret and connect result to the broader context. Although theoretical framework, conceptual framework is specific subsection in chapter 1, but it plays an important role throughout your research. So what are the roles? If you go to the research philosophy, if you plan to do quantitative research, which is actually, it fall under positivism perspective or philosophy, where in quantitative research, we will actually test the hypothesis. When we test the hypothesis, is actually we test the theory. Usually, we will do quantitative research is the theory will well established. For example, you would like to to analyze the low motivation levels of Form 2 student in learning STEM. Of course, the motivation theory has been well established by the previous researcher. So that's why you might be going to use quantitative. But when you look at low motivation levels of Form 2 student in learning STEM among might be special children or special student in Malaysia, specifically on certain disability of the student. Let's say you are focusing on um, deaf student who cannot hear, then of course might be there is no specific motivation theory inform us about how the motivation level of deaf student in learning STEM among secondary school students. That is where you might be going to move to qualitative research, where the theory is not well established, and you will reflect what we call it the philosophy for interpretivism, and you will actually explore and formulate a new model. So you can see here the theory is actually underpin your research philosophy. It also will underpin your research problem, because you will look at the issue. Because we need a theory. When we have a research problem, we have an issue in our study, that we need theory to answer the issue or to tell us where to go. For instance, if you're studying student engagement in flipped learning, you may draw on constructivist learning theory to justify why active learning environment are effective, because flipped learning is underpinned by constructivist learning. Can you see that? Okay, how you will discuss on the theory in your background or problem in your problem statement. In the research instrument part, theory also will guide you to choose and the choice of instrument, or to choose the instrument, tools, and method. For example, if your study is based on self-determination theory, is one of the motivation theory, your survey or interview question might focus on the dimension of self-determination theory, which are autonomy, competence, and relativeness. And the instrumentation is designed based on the theory that you choose in your theoretical framework. Can you see here that theory is very important in the context of PG research? So theory also will actually guide you to identify and to define your variables in your study, because theory will explain the relationship between the variables. Okay, when you read theory, you know that motivation theory will be affected based on the background of the student. Background is one one variable. Motivation theory is another variable. Okay? For example, in social connective theory, variable like self-efficacy, behavior, environments are interrelated. And this theory will guide how we define and measure these variables. And the variable in this study are derived from specific theory. You cannot just select any variable. It must be based on theory. That's why theoretical framework and conceptual framework are very important component in research. It's not for the sake of having a diagram, but you have to know that you have to hold the theory throughout the chapter of your thesis. Also in intervention, if your research is developing some treatments of interventions that you test on the effects of certain variables, and of course in intervention, okay, let's say you will actually develop a module to enhance motivation. And this is where you start to read in terms of motivation theory, how to enhance motivation, what are the approach can be used to enhance motivation. From that approach, of course, it has a specific theory, a specific model, and based on that, we will design our intervention or treatment or module based on how theory say to enhance motivation. For example, if your intervention is to design or to improve student motivation in flipped learning, self-determination theory again as a theory in motivation could explain how to foster autonomy, competence, and relativeness that motivate students to engage with the intervention. We use the self-determination theory in the instrument to measure the element of motivation of autonomy, competence, and relativeness. We also use the same dimension and principle in our intervention because how do we actually enhance autonomy? How do we enhance competence? How do we enhance relativeness that we will measure through our instrument? So that is where the theory also will define and help you to design your intervention. In finding also, theory will use to interpret and explain the finding. When you get the findings of the motivation levels of our Form 2 student in learning STEM in our study, and how do we interpret the finding from the perspective of theory? Okay, and for example, if your findings support constructivist theory, we can discuss how how our finding validate the idea that active learning lead to better outcome. So, and the findings are interpreted through the lens of the theory, meaning that we will interpret our finding from the perspective of the theory that we mentioned in our theoretical framework. So, can you see that the importance of theoretical framework, and conceptual framework in your research? And if I can visualize it into your chapter, in chapter 1, of course, you have background of problem, you have problem statement, you have theoretical framework, conceptual framework. Of course, conceptual framework, theoretical framework is specific subsection that you must explain on the theory that underpin your research. But in the background of problem and problem statement, you need to discuss in brief about the theory. You will discuss a detail about the theory, the evolution of the theory, the relationship about the theory in your literature review in chapter 2. And of course, in chapter 3, we need to apply the theory in our instrument, in our interventions, in our might be also in our data analysis if the theory actually a very comprehensive theory that explain up to how to analyze the data. And in chapter 4, when we answer our finding, we will look also how to answer back to the theory. And in chapter 5, when we discuss our finding, we will have what we call it contribution back to the theory and the body of knowledge. And this is where we have a section, subsection in chapter 5, which is actually the theoretical implications from your research finding. Okay, so let me stop for a while sharing that I would like to open question and answer from all of you. Have you ever imagined before this where the theoretical framework and conceptual framework is not only you put it in chapter 1, but it will be there across the chapter of your thesis? Anyone would like to ask question before I continue on the specific definition of theoretical framework, conceptual frameworks, and to guide you also on how to produce it in the context of your research, and also might be we will experience it. Any questions from the WebEx?
Assalamu
Anyone?
alaikum.
No, sir.
Uh, 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 Good afternoon, ma.
Good afternoon. Yes.
My question here mentioned the implication of the theory in chapter 5. So I don't know why should I put the implication of the theory in chapter 5.
You need to have it because a PhD research, you need to have a theoretical implication, because implication of your study will be towards on practical implication, the body of knowledge, the theory. You have to close the loop. If you start with mentioning the theories that underpin your research in theoretical framework, at the end of your chapter, your research, chapter 5, you need to explain how your finding will complement back to the existing theory that you refer in your theoretical framework. Is a must, Arun? If you don't put it, of course, the examiner will request you to put it. Okay?
Sorry, ma. The practical implication, the theoretical implication. So in chapter 5, should
Yeah.
I should I
Mhm.
put in chapter 5, or I should put another chapter to put in chapter 6?
No, no, it will be embedded in chapter 5, the last chapter, unless you have more chapter. I'm talking about the common chapters for thesis. Usually you have 5, but you have 6 chapter, it must be in the discussion chapter. It
Okay.
must be in discussion chapter, meaning that if you're, let's say you have more than 5 chapters, you have, let's say chapter 4 is your intervention, chapter 5 is your finding, chapter 6 is your discussion and conclusion. So the theoretical implication must be in the last chapter, which is actually your chapter 6. But the one that I show here is a common numbers of chapter that usually student has, which is actually 5 chapter. Okay?
Okay. So sorry, ma, as a result of the implication theory that I got in my research, should I formulate my own theory according to what I have gained in my research?
It depends on the scope of your research objective. Your research objective, at the end of it, you will formulate a framework, story, and so on. Of course, you will actually explain it, but remember, you might not going to be up to a level that you produce a new theory. You only complement the existing theory unless you are doing longitudinal study, which is actually totally qualitative under a grounded theory research design. Yeah, most probably you might going to propose a new theory. Yeah. Okay.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very
You
much, ma.
cannot say that you produce a new theory if your research design is not grounded theory. If your research design is grounded theory, then you can up to claim that you are producing new theory because grounded theory is a longitudinal study, has a very comprehensive data collection, interpretations, and so on. Okay. So
Naam,
I'm going to,
jazakumullah.
yeah. Any more questions from the WebEx? If no, I will proceed on the second parts of it. Of course, you still can ask question later on. Okay. Okay. Now we go to the parts of the definition of the theoretical framework itself. Theoretical framework is actually, it must have theory. Okay, that is why some of the students, when they have a theoretical framework, they did not put the theory. What do I mean by that? Okay, there is a flow of the info facts, and facts moving. I think I need to jump to one slide so that you will know well what do I mean by that. Okay, here you have to know that, okay, this is a flow of frameworks, model, and theory. Theory is more solid thing, okay, the things that has been tested throughout the time. So it's going to become a theory. It can be changed. Theory sometimes represented by the model, okay, and the model can be represented by the framework. So let's say in your chapter 1, when you have your theoretical framework, some students, they did not actually mention the theory underpinning their model that they use in their research. For example, as I did mention, ARCS, the motivation model or framework by Taylor. A for attention, R for relevant, C for confident, ARCS, S for satisfaction. Of course, ARCS has specific research instrument, which is actually called as IMMS. So here, Taylor ARCS is not a theory. The theory is a self-determination theory. ARCS is the framework. So that's why in theoretical framework, when you found out, let's say you read from literature, you found out one article that has a four frameworks of blended learning or flipped learning, then you want to use it in your research. Remember, the model or the framework is not a theory. It's a model or framework that represent the theory. So you have to read further the articles that you adapt the frameworks of flipped learning. What are the theory underpinning the framework? Because in your research, in your theoretical framework, you have to mention the theory first, and the theory will actually underpin the selected model or framework that you will use in your research. If you only put the model, meaning that your theoretical framework did not represent the theory. You have to know the root of the theory that underpin the frameworks that you select in your research. I will explain it further. Okay, so that's why sometimes during Viva, the examiner says that I cannot see a theory in your theoretical framework. Of course, because might be you are using a frameworks or model that has been developed, might be in 2018, that by some prominent researcher from certain country that you think that the model or the framework is really close to your research, but you did not know what are the theory underpinning the framework. This is where you need to read further. Okay. And the conceptual framework is the basis of your research problem and will describe the aspect that you selected from the theoretical framework. Because in theoretical framework, you cannot see the variable in theoretical framework. But in conceptual framework, you're able to see the variable. Because in theoretical framework, it's just a theory that influence the issue and the factors that you would like to study. But in the conceptual framework, you explain in detail how the theory is actually integrated in the context of your research. Does the theory integrate in the instrumentation, or does the theory integrate in the intervention, or does the theory integrate in the need analysis survey? So this is where you have to know that you have to show in the conceptual framework. So the theoretical framework is elucidates the theoretical foundation of your work. We're building upon the existing research, whereas the conceptual framework empower you to make your own inference by outlining the variables that may be employed in your study and the dynamic relationship between them. That's why if you are doing totally qualitative research, it's not mixed method. You are doing totally qualitative research, like for example, ethnography, grounded theory. You did not need theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks in pure qualitative research, because qualitative research is more on explore the situation where you come up with a new finding, new facts, because you interpret it. The philosophy of qualitative research interpretism. So if you're doing totally 100% qualitative research, most probably you do not need a theoretical framework diagram and conceptual framework diagram. However, you still need the theory in chapter 2, that because the theory will benchmark, you will use the theory to benchmark your data collection process in qualitative research. Because in qualitative research, you did not test the theory, you might be going to formulate a new theory. So that is quite clear. You have to know that, meaning that in a thesis, you can not having, you don't have a theoretical framework if you're doing 100% qualitative research. You only use theory to benchmark your research. That's all. Okay. So when you talk about the theory, you can see that this diagram show it very well, because the data will actually reflect the theory and it will bring the theoretical frameworks and up to the conceptual framework. Then you can see the objective view, the deductive, what you call it, the deductive perspective. If you are doing quantitative research, is a deductive perspective. You will start with conceptual frameworks, theoretical framework theory, and to the data, because you test the certain part of the theory through your hypothesis. But if you do a qualitative research, it's more on inductive, and that where based on data, you will develop the theory, you will maybe expand it to the framework and expand it to the conceptual and theoretical framework. Okay. Okay, this is just, I'm going to go fast from here because you enroll into education program. Of course, the theory that close to your research must be the learning theory. And this diagram is just to show you the connection and the list of learning theory that you can refer. Okay, because you need to read about the theory, because most examiner, the popular question they will ask you, why you are selecting theory A but not theory B but not theory C. Then you need to answer it. And that's why you need to know the position of the learning theory in the context of holistic connection. Okay. Like this also, there are different types of learning theory: the behaviorist theory, the cognitive theory, the constructivist theory, the social learning theory, connectivism theory, and the adult learning theory. And each of the theory here, it actually carries different principle. For example, if you go for behaviorism, it has a principle like direct instruction, like the tutorial. If you develop module tutorial, which is actually more reflecting the behaviorist nature of learning, then you might be going to use a direct instruction principle, which is actually the theory, the underpinning direct instruction principle is behaviorist theory. Okay, and of course here you can see that at this one, for example, constructivism. If you use discovery learning, problem-based learning in your research as an intervention, as an approach of learning, you have to mention that this kind of approach is underpinned by constructivism. And in constructivism also, there are many philosophers in constructivism, which one that influence, really influence your research. And of course, when you talk about problem-based learning, there are several problem-based learning models that you might going to use it in your chapter 3 and as part of your theoretical framework. But in theoretical framework subsection in chapter 1, you need to mention that problem solving or problem-based learning approach or model or stages or what is underpinned by which learning theory. Most probably is constructivism. Okay, and this is another what I call it, explanation to explain to you when you decide on certain theory, you have to know that the concept or the philosophy behind the theory. The behaviorism is more looking at the behavior, while the cognitive is looking at how the learners compute understanding on certain concept. Same goes to constructivism, and down here you can see here the potential variables that you can measure according to the theory. Can you see it? As I did mention, the theory also affect in the selection of variables that you will use in your research. If you talk about connectivism, you have to know that connectivism is looking at learners as a node, learning technologies, the learning contents, and the learning context. And when you have this kind of 4 element, you have to make sure that this 4 element that you implement in your intervention, if you claim that your intervention is based on connectivism. For example, you do research related to MOOC, the theory underpinning MOOC is connectivism. So you have to explain in the context of MOOCs that considering learners as node, learning as a content, learning as learning context, and also the learning technology. Can you see the relationship of the theory in the context of your research? Another popular theory in our area in Edutech is the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. So we talk about multimedia learning. When you start to use graphics, you use animation, you use video, audio in your research, of course you have to go back to the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, the popular theory by Clark and Mayer, because you know that there is a limitations of the cognitive structure of a human, where there is actually the memory of human has been divided into sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. So at this point also might be your research objective. If you would like to go beyond working memory, you might going to have a variables called retention, student retention in learning, because you would like to measure the long-term memory if cognitive theory of multimedia learning underpin your research. Can you see here? That's why I'm trying to explain it, the importance of theory, because most of students, when they do research, they just They just claim they are using that theory, but at the end of it, examiner cannot see the theory in the intervention, cannot see it in the objective, cannot see it in the variable, cannot see in the instrument. So the mismatch take place there, which is actually at the end of it, it will result. You need to collect new data again, or might be, or you need to revival or what, because you did not know actually the theory that underpin your research. Another principle is the Mayer principles using multimedia for e-learning. So this is all the 10 principles by Mayer. So if you say that you are using multimedia in learning, then of course, you have to look at this principle. You are, you are not being forced to use all the 10 principles, but use it according to the scope of your research, according to the level of your respondent, the sample, then which one, and give justification why you are considering certain Mayer principle only. Another popular one is the community of inquiry models. If you have forum, if you use forum, if you use MOOCs, if you use a Padlet, where you can see the students start to discuss in your research, of course, you cannot go far for the community of inquiry frameworks. Because if you use Facebook in your research, Twitter, TikTok, because it represents the social present, the cognitive present, and teaching present. If you are focusing totally on student learning like TikTok, so maybe you can omit the teaching present because teacher is not the one who handle the TikTok. Then it might be you only represent the social present and the cognitive present. And when you talk about social present, there is an instrument that that reflects on all the elements of social present based on COI, community of inquiry frameworks. Okay. And it also relate back to the tools that you use. For example, if you use Padlet, of course you need to help in terms of cognitive present in the Padlet, because through Padlets, students will build their cognitive thinking. Another one is TPAC. Remember, TPAC is a technological pedagogical content knowledge. This is actually looking most at the teacher perspective. Okay, if you read TPAC, the root and the foundation of TPAC, how it has been developed, usually technology pedagogical content knowledge is suitable if you do research among teachers, not you can do it among students, but you have to read it carefully. For me, TPAC is suitable if your respondent is actually teachers, might be pre-service teacher. Pre-service teacher is still student, isn't it? But the pre-service teacher, but you cannot use TPAC for primary school, like preschool children, because technology pedagogical, because they don't have a pedagogical part, isn't it? They don't have the pedagogical part, because the pedagogical part is only occurred among potential teachers, pre-service teacher, or instructor, trainer, and so on, or lecturers, and so on. So this is where you have to know, not just selecting any theory. If you talk about zone of proximal developments, or you also have scaffolding in your research. Of course, ZPD, you know the ZPD by Vygotsky, explain it, how a user or a learner go beyond their connective thinking through the ZPD, zone of proximal development. So if you use peer learning, for example, you have peers, the rules of peers in your research, the rule of technology or content in your research, most probably the technology and the peer will act as a knowledgeable others. And this the concept of knowledgeable others is where will assist the learners moving from what I can learn on my own to what I can help with help, and to go beyond their what you call it, learning and understanding. So this is where you can, like for example, if you focus on knowledge construction, of course you have to use ZPD as a theory or model. Sorry, the theory is by Vygotsky, the social learning theory. The concept is ZPD and scaffolding. You have to know that. And of course, if your variable is knowledge construction, most probably you have to reflect the ZPD and scaffolding. The motivation theory, Okay, there are numbers of motivation theory like Maslow, Herzberg, expectancy theory, self-determination theory, goal setting theory, and equity theory. So look at this theory. How do you know this theory will underpin your research? Sometimes when we do research, we try to have a shortcut way. We try to speed up our research. Maybe we read several articles, previous research, and we really like the research instrument that has been used in that previous research. If you think that the research instrument in the previous article is the one that you would like to use in your research, you need to read more how the research instrument has been developed and what are the theory underpinning the research instrument. For example, if you use IMMS, the motivation theory, or if you use IMI, the inventory or intrinsic motivation inventory. IMI is intrinsic motivation inventory. So you have to read IMI is actually based on which theory? IMI is based on self-determination theory by Ryan and Dickey. So that is going to be the theory that you put in your theoretical framework. And of course, the dimension of IMI, autonomy, relatedness, and another one, the one that I mentioned before this, that dimension will be in your theoretical framework and will be represented in your IMI questionnaire at the end of your study when you want to measure the level of intrinsic motivation of students through the intrinsic motivation inventory. So I want you to know the relationship of the theory. It's not just a touch and go theory, a theory that will help you throughout your research. This is an example of my previous student. This is by Dr. Lau Eun Hua. So you can see that I put it side by side so that you can see the relationship between the theoretical framework and conceptual framework. In her research, the theoretical framework, if you look back, let me try to go back. If you look at the research, it's about okay, online authentic learning for inferential statistics at undergraduate level. So the authentic learning force her to find the authentic learning principle of theory that she will use in her research. So in the theoretical framework that she decided, so she identified the authentic learning principle by Harrington, and the authentic learning principle, the one that you have here, almost 10 principle, is actually underpinned by situated learning theory by Leaf and Wenger. You see that the theory is there because this situated learning theory is the theory underpin the authentic learning principle by Harrington and Oliver. So if you don't mention the theory, meaning that your theoretical framework lack of theory, because you might be only mention the principle of authentic learning. And it also, when you talk about authentic tasks, because she will deliver the authentic task through online learning, so she has a social development theory by Wygotsky that influenced her research. Although she referred to the authentic learning principle by Harrington, but the authentic learning principle by Harrington underpinned by two theory, which are situated learning theory and social development theory. So the theory must be there. You need to mention in your subsection of theoretical framework that the authentic learning principle based on Harrington's and Oliver 2000 is based on two underpinning theory, which are situated learning theory by Dave and Wenger, and also the social development theory by Wygotsky. And of course, she actually measure the knowledge construction. Then she need to have the part of principle and theory about to measure the knowledge construction, and she measure also the knowledge retention and the student performance. When come to the student performance, if you would like to measure student performance per se, might be you don't have a theory to reflect the student performance. But if your student performance based on higher order thinking like Bloom, okay, or low overthinking based on Bloom taxonomy, then you have to mention that the theory that underpin your variables of student performance is a cognitive Bloom taxonomy. Okay, and of course, in terms of examples of conceptual framework, you can see here in the conceptual framework, she explained on how she used the task, which is actually based on Leaf and Wenger, situated learning theory, and the interactions that based on the Vygotsky, which is actually represented by the authentic learning environments by Harrington, and the effect towards, can you see the arrow, the impacts toward the knowledge construction and also performance in statistics and knowledge retention. So this is where you can see that example of theoretical frameworks. These I think uh, with this, she able to publish Q1 articles under the ETRD journal. So that's why your conceptual framework and theoretical framework must be solid enough, because nowadays most of Q1 journals, especially under WOS, is very critical and looking at the theory that you apply. This is another one. This is by my another student, Dr. Siti Khadijah. So the topic of her research is about provisions of feedback towards reflective thinking skill to educational blogging. So feedback carries certain principle and might be if it reach up to theory and she need to find a theory about feedback. The reflective thinking skill is a theory that she needs to look, and of course will be represented by certain criteria or elements or frameworks or model in her research. So he actually used the case-based learning as a tool in her study. So case-based learning is underpinned by social constructivist theory, and because Harriet characteristic of case-based learning is actually underpinned by Vygotsky. How do we know it? You need to read the article by Harriet 1997. Then you can see that most of Harriet works on characteristic of cases in case-based learning is referring to Vygotsky, and that's going to be your theory. The feedback, she used question prompt types by Bradley, Tom, Hayes, and Hay, 2008. So when she read this article by question prompt types, it looks like it refer also to the social constructivism theory by Vygotsky, 1978. Another variables that she measured is the reflective thinking, and she want to use the Hatton and Smith 1995 reflective thinking framework. And when she read this article by Hatton and Smith, the theory underpinned the reflective thinking framework by Hatton and Smith is constructivism theory. So by Devi, 1916. So you can see that here, this is to show the theoretical framework. And at the end of it, she would like to see the learning performance pathway based on the level of reflective thinking skill and feedback types to educational blogging. And the conceptual frameworks, she not mentioned again the theory. You see that? There's no theory on it. This is on all the criteria in detail, the question prompt in detail, the principle of reflective thinking framework in detail, and you can see the variable there. It will affect the performance test and formulate the learning performance pathway that she wants. Okay. And this is another example. This is another example, but in Malay. But this is actually examples of the effects of flipped classroom based on digital games, okay, towards student performance, year 5 student performance in machine topic. So you can see here in the theoretical frameworks on the left, it shows the flipped learning. Flipped learning, the one who initiate flipped learning is Bergman and Sam. Okay, if you use flipped learning in your study, you have to mention in your writing chapter 2 and in your theoretical framework that your flipped learning concept is based on Bergman and Sam. And she has a specific principle by Jugan et al. 2014. So this is all the principle, and the principle also reflecting Bergman and Sam. Then she also have the games principle by Toda that she used in the study. And of course, game is based on constructivism. Okay. And then of course she used to look at the learning pattern. Okay. Then she used the Wintinger and also the constructivist socials as part of the element. And on the right is where you can see the flipped learnings implementations in the real research. Okay. Okay, I will stop my sharing for a while and I will open for question and answer. Any question, I hope you can see very clear the relationship between the theories and your research. Okay, any question? So far, so good? Okay, it's good. Okay, we move it how to formulate. Okay, and how to formulate it? Okay, remember, you're not going to separate the process of identifying the theory from your research. Okay, when you already prepare your chapter 2, you know very well which theory that will underpin your research. Okay, there will be no new theory. Okay, remember, there will be no new theory unless your chapter 2 is not complete. Of course, you need to add. Okay, let us experience it. I'll skip this one. I only put it here. This one I explain it again. So you can see that here the models it moving towards the characteristic, the theory. This is the relationship of the fact. Okay, and it become law. Okay, so for example here, let's say the theory is the Vygotsky social constructivism theory, but the model is flipped learning model, but the framework is 4 pillars of flipped framework. Okay, you see that? So in your theoretical framework, these 3 elements must be there. But in your chapter 3 later on, you will explain more on 4 pillars of flipped framework that you implement as an intervention in your study. And this 4 pillar of flipped framework underpinned by flipped learning model and flipped learning model underpinned by Vygotsky social constructivism model. Theory, sorry. So this is how you do it. Another way, here you can see here, because the theory is the why behind the practice. Because constructivism will explain why blended learning work. The model is what or specific representation of the theory. So how does the theory will be represented in your research? Okay, you cannot just say that my research use Vygotsky social constructivism theory. That's all. No, what are the specific model that represent the Vygotsky social constructivism theory? ZPD, problem solving, scenario based. That is where you need to find it. The framework is the how or practical guideline for implementing the model. Sometimes you end up with model only. You don't have specific framework. That's okay. And sometimes you don't have a specific framework to explain the model. For example, problem solving. Problem solving, there are so many problem solving model, but there is no specific problem solving framework. But if there is, then you use it. See? Problem solving model, there are so many because it depends on the researcher, the philosopher who developed the model by Johnson and Johnson, might be if the problem solving model specifically for online learning and you are doing online learning problem solving, then of course you can use the problem solving models that based on online learning nature. Okay, how to formulate it? First, of course, you already conducted your chapter 2. That's why theoretical framework, we will do that after we finish chapter 2. In chapter 2, you already reviewed previous research. From that, you can identify the theory. Let's say in chapter 2, there are quite numbers of previous research that you review, up to 50 articles might be. Out of these 50 articles, might be only 5 articles that really related to your research. Then you start to zoom into these 5 articles. And based on these 5 articles, what are the theory underpin their research? Okay, most probably you have two approach, whether you are use the same theory or you use the combination of the existing theory in the article with the combination of new theory, because you would like to seek to give flavor or new perspective in your research. After you identify it, you identify the key concept gap in the existing knowledge and theory. What are the gaps in the theory? Might be the gaps in the theory, it did not explain very well about Form 2 students, the secondary school student, especially deaf student in learning STEM, the motivation part. Okay, there are many theories about motivation theories or model, but none of them is focusing on secondary school deaf student in learning STEM. That's why you need to inject the motivation theory itself is not enough. You need to inject with a deaf learners or a concept. And when you talk about disability in teaching and learning, you might going to consider the universal design learning model inside your study. So of course, motivation theory at this moment did not consider the universal design, the UDL, universal design learning, which is actually providing spatial learning environment to this kind of disabled students, deaf student. So that's how you do it. And of course, you have two theory now. Okay, and you define the key concept, you determine the relationship. Can you see that I have two theory on the universal design learning model because it's not up to a theory, it's just only a model. And I have the motivation theory, and I'm zooming into the ARCS model by Keller, and I have the instrument of IMMS. So this is one where I would like to see the relationship. Then after that, I formulate the diagram. I formulate the framework. How does these two theory complement each other in the context of your research? Whether it's overlapping, whether it's not overlapping, it's just we're going to be integrate together. That is up how do you interpret it. Then you produce the write-up and explain how the theories supporting each other. In conceptual frameworks developments, of course, you identify your research problem, you identify the key concept and variable from the theory. Remember, theoretical frameworks must be related with conceptual framework. In conceptual framework, you can see the variable, but in theoretical framework, you cannot see the variable, but you can see how it been tackled certain part on motivation. Because when you talk about motivation, you cannot just say you measure motivation per se, because motivation has specific dimension. Are you measuring motivation in terms of intrinsic motivation or extrinsic motivation? Because each types of motivation has a dimension, and which type of dimension that you refer, and it carry a specific instrument. So that's why you have to define the key concept and variable in conceptual framework. You develop your hypothesis or research question, then develop first your conceptual framework, then you develop your hypothesis, then you determine your research methodology, and you refine and revise. Can you see that chapter 1, theoretical and conceptual framework, will guide your chapter 3. That's why, as I did mention to most of the students, chapter 3 is a very interesting chapter and easy chapter to do, compared to the other chapter. There is a guideline known as IPO model for you to guide you to draw your conceptual framework. I stand for input, P stand for process, O stand for output. So when you divide your conceptual framework, most probably you can divide it systematically into 3 phases. And later on also, your research procedure can reflect these 3 phases of IPO model. For example here, this is an example of conceptual frameworks where in the input part, you might be going to look at the user information, and in the process part, you have a specific development of system, model, and so on, and the output part is the one that you measure. This is actually performance test, critical thinking, will be the part of variable, independent variables that you measure. And of course, you will like to evaluate. So your conceptual framework can look like this. This is another example of conceptual framework. Let's say you would like to focus on self-directed learning module for learning science. If you divide into 3, so might be before you develop the module, you will identify the learning style and what kind of model of learning style that you refer. Let's say you are referring to WARC model. Motivation level, what kind of motivation that you refer, or you might be also looking at the higher order thinking level, whether which model, which level is actually score more by the student. And then of course, you put it inside here as a process. Here, in the process, might be you use Eddie model, you use Assure model to design the self-directed learning model based on this input data. Then of course, at the output, you will check on the motivation level back and the higher order thinking. Okay, this is another example. If you do totally survey research, the conceptual framework example, that you can see the connection among the variables. And this is another way of it. If you divide it, you can see this is input, process, and output. Okay. Okay, I share the attendant form because it's almost 3:30. Okay, just wait for a while. I will copy paste it. I think I have it. Yeah, in the chat. Okay, so I will open question and answer, and of course, the attendant form, I also put some part of comments and remarks if you just want to say something about today's session so that later on I can improve. the sharing session from time to time. Okay, anyone would like to ask questions before I go for let experience it. Okay, let us experience it. We're not going to do the activity directly through our session today, but later on you can practice yourself to create your own theoretical framework. Anyone would like to ask question? Anyone? Let me look at the chat. No? Okay, let's move forward. Okay. Okay, next is let us experience it. For those who did not have your theoretical framework yet, you can just use this step to do your theoretical framework. Okay, I give you a template. Later on, I will give you the slide. Of course, you have to identify the research problem, the variables, the theories, and you will develop it. Okay, use this template. Okay, for example, let's say your research problem is about the student engagement have an impact on academic achievement in high school. So the variable, what is the variable? The independent variable is student engagement. The dependent variable is academic achievement. So look at the theory. Do you have a theory to represent student engagement? Of course, social learning theory or self-determination theory. Okay, and then what are the elements of this engagement? Because engagement covers so many dimensions. If you look at Philman mentioned there are 7 types of engagement, and you would like to focus, okay, which type of engagement? Is it connective engagement? Is it social engagement? Is it social engagement, or is it behavioral engagement? And then you decide it. And of course, you have to add justification when you decide on to focus on only 1 or 2 elements of engagement. And in terms of academic achievement, if you would like to focus on connective Bloom taxonomy, of course, the theory is connective learning theory, and higher order thinking Bloom is the popular one. And you have to decide. Usually, higher order thinking tackle the highest levels of 3, and which Bloom that you refer. If you refer to Anderson and Krathwohl, then the order of creating and evaluating has been changed, isn't it? So this is where the detailed, the elements of the theoretical frameworks you need to identify it. Okay, this is a template. You can try it by yourself. So if you have more than 1 independent variable, you just add the column. If you have more than dependent variable, then you just add the column. And don't worry, sometimes certain variables you don't have theory. That's okay. You just put it dash or not applicable. Here, if your academic achievement is academic achievement per se, based on the performance of post and pre-test, not based on Bloom, then you don't have a theory unit. Then you don't have a theory unit. Then you are referring totally on the score of performance test. Okay, and I just give you some guideline where if you look at this, the cognitive engagement, you can just Google it. There are so many definitions about cognitive engagement based on this previous researcher, and which one that you would like to use. And here you can see that it must be appropriate to the level of respondent that you focus on your research. If you focus on school, then you have to use the one that appropriate for school level. If you focus on higher ed, then to use the definition of cognitive engagement and the principle of cognitive engagement that is suitable based on higher ed. Okay, that is where it's very important for you to know, okay, that the theory link with it. And the theory later on will link to your instrument like this. Okay, when your theory is self-determined theory by Ryan and Leakey, then the right instrument that you should use is intrinsic motivation inventory, not the ARCS. If you use IMMS, okay, the instructional material motivation survey by Keller, the theory underpin IMMS is expectancy value theory and ARCS model by Keller. Same goes to motivated strategy for learning questionnaire by Pinterest and DeGroat. The theory that underpin the instrument is this. So you can work backward, identify first the instrument, and then you decide on the theory, or you can use forward where you identify the theory and later on you find the instrument. Okay, I think that's all my sharing session for today. I will open for Q&A. Any questions? You are free to ask. Okay? Anyone would like to ask question? What do you feel? What do you feel after I explain theoretical and conceptual framework? I hope it's clear because I try to simplify it. I try to make it integrate with the whole of your thesis so that you know the importance of it. You have to hold it, the theory, because most of the common issue, I'm not saying a problem, common issue in student doing research is that at the end of it, the instrument, the intervention, the finding is not contributing back to the theory that has been selected in theoretical framework. And that's the issue. And of course, the examiner will have a big concern on it and they will ask detail. That's why you have to know the whole of your research. Okay, any questions? No? Okay. If there is no question, that is all our boot camp for today. If you can on a camera for a while so that I can take a pictures just to report it to our head of department. This is the numbers of students who attend the boot camp. So anyone can you on the camera so that we can take pictures. Okay? Okay, can we take pictures? So just wait for a while. I'm just waiting for the whiles for all of you on the camera. Okay. There will be 2 pages, okay, because 45 students who join it. I will share the recording later on and the slide, okay, so that you can see and look at it. I hope, okay, don't take theoretical framework as a difficult part in the thesis to formulate it. When you know the rules of it, where is it in your study, it will helps you to understand it very well. Okay, I take the first page first. Smile. Okay, so I done with the first page. I go for the second page. Where is it? The second page. Okay, the second page. Okay, smile. Okay, then let me look back whether I have a third page. Wait, no, I only have 1 and 2 pages. Okay, thank you very much. All the best. Good luck. I will share the recording later on. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you.